How can embracing both your feminine and masculine energies transform the way you lead? In this week's episode, we dive into the power of balancing these energies, whether you're managing a team at work or navigating challenges at home. I'll share my personal journey to becoming a leadership coach and explore how tapping into these synergies can help you lead with more confidence, clarity, and authenticity. This is a must listen for any woman ready to step into her full leadership potential. Stay tuned.
Welcome to The Balanced Leader, hosted by Yan Dang, a leadership and life coach with over 20 years of corporate experience. Drawing from her journey as a former global finance leader and second-generation immigrant, Yan understands the unique challenges women face in male-dominated workplaces. Each episode offers insights on balancing masculine and feminine energies, mastering soft skills, and building emotional intelligence. Join us to transform frustration into empowerment and unlock your authentic leadership potential.
Are you familiar with the difference between masculine and feminine energy and how understanding this balance can change your life? I was recently a guest on the Make Money as a Life Coach podcast with my business coach, Stacey Boehman. We had a fun conversation about my transition from being a corporate executive to leadership coaching and the techniques and tools that have helped me shift into becoming a successful leadership coach and entrepreneur. One of the most valuable things I needed to understand to help balance my time, expectations, goals, pressure, and all the important moving parts in my life, like family and relationships, was the balance of masculine and feminine energy. This has transformed my self-trust in my decision-making and allowed me to really embrace the messiness that life sometimes has to offer, especially with 2 young kids. The same is possible for you in your own career. So listen and enjoy this interview with Stacey. I want you, while you're listening, to notice for yourself how masculine energy shows up in your life. And for most of my listeners, high-achieving, ambitious women, don't be surprised that most of the way you think and what you value currently in your life is very masculine focused. We live in a very masculine society, and part of this self-understanding and being compassionate for ourselves is to understand that by being masculine in the corporate world, this is how you got to where you are right now, but where you want to be, which is even higher levels of leadership, more meaning, more satisfaction, more confidence, clarity, and purpose. This is actually the journey into the feminine. And so I invite you into this space. The leaders that are able to connect, inspire, speak to the hearts and minds of people, they are the ones that are holding feminine energy. So I want to offer to my women listeners that this journey into the feminine can help unlock more satisfaction, more meaning, more purpose, more confidence, and compassion for yourself. So enjoy this episode.
I have one of my students on the podcast today, and I'm so excited to talk to her and glean as much, gleam as much insight as I possibly can for you all, as she has just crossed the 200K mark. So without further ado, Yan, hello, how are you?
I'm well, Stacey. Thank you.
Will you introduce yourself? Tell everyone who you are, what you coach, how long maybe you've been in business.
Yeah, okay. So I can share about all of that. So I'm Yan Dang. I am a corporate leadership and life coach. I work with women in male-dominated spaces, build lasting confidence and emotional wealth. So I have over 20 years in the corporate world as a global finance leader, and I made the switch back in 2021, but that was also the same time I had my first daughter. And yeah, so a lot has happened. I would say I officially started my business at the beginning of 2022, so right in the middle of the pandemic. And then,
were you working from home then, I assume?
Yeah, I was working from home, and I had a lot of things happen at the end of 2020. I got married, I moved to Florida, and I had just started thinking about what I wanted to do next because I knew my role, there was a big acquisition or integration happening. So my role was going away, and I was trying to figure out, what's next for me as I explore, what I wanted for my life.
Did you have a baby yet? Were you pregnant yet? Like, did the exploring come from that, or that happened after?
That happened after. So it was 2020. I got married October 1 and we found out, surprise, like we wanted to have a baby, you know?
Yeah.
So luckily it didn't take us very long. It was around Thanksgiving. So about a month later,
Wow.
we realized that a baby was coming. And I also had moved from Chicago to Florida. So there was just a lot of life
Yeah.
changes happening in all of that time. And I think things were kind of opening up for me in terms of like, what did I want next? And one of the things I did in my corporate role that I loved was I was the executive sponsor for this women's leadership group.
Oh,
Actually, it
wow.
was just a women's group in general, not even leadership, but we wanted to focus on leadership. And what I loved about it was coaching people one on one and connecting
Mm.
with them. And it created a lot of meaning for me. And so as I was thinking about what's next, I remember my husband being like, your heart's not really into finance. Like you do it. Like I did a great job. I loved being part of a leadership team. I loved managing my team, but I wanted to help people in a different way. And so I really see myself now as helping people bridge that technical expertise with emotional intelligence. And
Mm.
I was really drawn to your style too, Stacey, because you're really masculine in some ways, but really feminine. And then I also think like with motherhood, you've become even more feminine, which I appreciate because a lot of the women that I coach, I oftentimes say like we're even more masculine than the men because we're so good at doing the things, you know?
Yes.
But as you extend into leadership and management, it's so much more important to like reclaim and embrace those feminine qualities. And also feels
Yeah.
weird and vulnerable sometimes because you're like, well, I was supposed to be a robot. This is how I
Oh,
excelled, right?
making me cry a little bit.
Oh, are you?
I
I was
had like a tear
noticing
pop
that.
out. I love that. Like, I think it's so true. I don't even know what the emotion was that just came up for me, but I think what I was thinking is like how badly we need that. Because one of the things I've been thinking about burnout a lot, so many coaches are afraid of burnout. And I do think that it happens when you stay in your masculine energy too long. And I do think women are kind of like trained in society to be in that energy all of the time, right? We're caretaking at home, we're caretaking at work. We're just like always the one taking care of everyone. And there's no one typically taking care of us. I just love this. I love the work that you're doing. I love that you see that in me. I love that we can both model that really well for other people because it's like, that's the emotion. It's like, I think it's so life changing for women. Oh, I have
Yeah.
another one coming out.
Well, and I do think you're really on to something of like, it becomes exhausting to like not
Yeah.
have your full self at work. And then emotions, right? You never want to be the woman in the boardroom crying, right? So there's
Yeah.
so much negative connotation about like crazy emotions, but
Yeah.
it's like, how do you use them in a way that helps you feel nourished and full and like you're
Mhm.
leading like with your whole self? So yeah, it's kind of an exciting time in my life too, because I also had a baby last year. So I launched my first group in August. It was like the most work that I had ever done. Like I was like putting my child to sleep and like writing emails until like midnight. And for me, it was just like, okay, this is my expanded capacity. I'm choosing to do it
Yeah.
at this point in time. And then I'm also right now launching a podcast that will launch next week. So like
Yeah.
that's another baby. Like I think about these things
Yeah.
as like a baby, right? You have to nurture it while I'm serving my one-on-one clients, while I'm doing my
Yeah.
first group, and then my whole family life, as you said, right? I'm not off work, like, doing other stuff, self-coaching or,
Yeah. Yeah.
taking care of, I'm like on mommy duty. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
let me go. And I still find, those things nourishing and what I want in my life, but it's a lot messier than I had when
Yeah.
I was like in my corporate role, which was also difficult, but it's also like, oh, I can go for a long run or I can like get a massage
Yes.
and I can take care of myself in a lot of different ways. It's just a totally different ball game. And so, I
Yeah.
love my life. I love, having created this business and I was sharing. So I just turned 43, so I'm an older mother too. And
Me too. It's fine.
yeah, but I'm embracing it. Like I think I have so much more my own emotional intelligence, so much more
Yes.
structure and network in my life now to, have it be what I want, even if, I started my family later. One of the thoughts that really helps me in my
This-
business, in life, is I'm exactly where I need to be.
Yeah, that's so good. I really do think hearing you talk that you are in a like kind of like the slingshot phase, right? Where you're like pulling back, but you're going to slingshot forward. Like there's so much investing right now that you're doing in your business, investing in a resource like a podcast, investing in learning how to pivot to group. And I just know that there's like this period where it's happening under the surface and people don't really see it yet, but you really do kind of compound that momentum in a big way. So I would really expect that that's coming. And one of the thoughts that I have, I'm curious about how you think about it, but I do think it can be chaos to have a toddler at home or a baby at home and be running a business and actively growing that business, right? Not just maintaining, but actively growing it. And one of the thoughts that's really helpful to me is I just think like I'm going to look back and think this was the best time of my life. I'm feeling highly emotional today already. Like this has just been like, we got home from vacation last night and the dogs always like stink so bad because they play with each other the whole time the dog sitter's here. And my one dog, Bear, who's a mixed breed, just has like the worst breath ever. And so they always stink so bad when we get home. So I told my husband he had to give them a bath. And he said when he got home, for the first time ever, Bear, my 13-year-old dog, fell out of the car and Neil caught him. But he was like, I think this was his last trip to the dog bath center. And then this morning I was just like watching him struggle so hard to like lay down. And it's like washing over me that like it's happening very fast how old he's getting. I would like get emotional thinking about it now. So I normally get very mad when they bark. And then just now I was like, oh, one day you're not going to be here to bark. So very emotional. It just like hit me. He's getting so old. Anyways, what were we saying before they like crazily interrupted us?
I think you were talking about that I will look back at this time and be
yes,
like, kids are growing. I'm growing. I am modeling for them. I have 2 girls and I often think about that too, of like how I want to model this for them. But I do think like, just as you're talking about the dog and like that emotional pull, my daughter got foot and mouth, that.
Oh my gosh, it's awful. Hand, foot, and mouth.
Yes, yeah. And so I'm noticing myself, leaving to go to the bathroom, seeing her, we've got a nanny, and like her crying and just wanting like that pull of like emotionally wanting to just comfort her. And I'm like, but I have work to do. And then it's like, how do I carve out a few minutes here and be with her and know that, mommy still has work to do. But I do think this is like that emotional piece, right? Like we not only feel for our clients, ourselves, but then it's like, when you have these young ones in your family, it can impact your energy, And so I also appreciate what you say about energy. Sometimes like on a webinar or whatever, I can really bring it really quickly and I, feel it there. But I think there's also that stretch of that increasing that energy or that capacity. Because I remember last week I had, a webinar and then I had like 3 one-on-one clients and I had a consult and I was like, my energy. And then it's like into soccer practice with my toddler, it's like, there's just like all these pulls on your energy and having to stretch yourself, but also take care of yourself and also know that like, you're a human with lots of experiences while you're trying to create a business. So I'm just feeling like sort of the messiness of it all, but also like the opportunity in building the capacity.
Yeah. But I think sometimes you just have to like, I don't know, for me, I have to just embrace the chaos. Like, it's like, this is what it is. This is a messy time. And, I used to have shows when I was pitching that like in stores where the crowd would just be rowdy. Like, I can't even describe how rowdy some crowds would get in specific stores. Like, just like wild. And I remember the times where I would get like, I tended to be a very like orderly pitch artist. I wanted things very like the way they're supposed to be. And anytime I resisted and fought against crowds that just weren't having that, I used to call it like, you just never know what's going to happen. You never know which way this is going to go. But the times where I would just lean in and be like, oh, this is a tornado store. Okay, here we are. And it's just never going to be a perfect show. It's never going the way you want. Like stores where like employees would be interrupting you all the time and like just craziness. And the more I leaned into it, the better I sold. And so I think there's like a little piece of sometimes we want that like orderly perfection. We want the exact right amount of time of sleep and the exact right amount of time of rest and the exact right amount of time to coach ourselves. And we want to be able to do all these things perfectly. And instead, it's like, okay, I couldn't make the live call today, so I've got to watch the replay. And it was 90 minutes. And so I'm going to watch it over 9-10-minute segments. And that's how it's going to work. And if I just lean into that, like, I think so often that resistance, it's like takes us out of the joy of the process, which is something I wanted to ask you about. So I have been watching you, and it'll be interesting to see if you feel this way about yourself or if you notice this, because sometimes what we see, someone else sees, we don't see, or I could just be picking up on something that you don't experience at all. But from having coached you for several rounds, how many rounds is this for you now?
I'm in the 5th round.
Okay. So I thought it had been a while. So I've been coaching you for a while, and there's something that I've noticed that I think that you do well, or at least I perceive that you do well, that I think people could learn from, is you're quite calm and methodical in the process, or at least it seems that way. In the coaching, in the self-coaching, when you ask for coaching on the page, just when I'm reading your stuff, when I'm talking to you, I don't notice a big, and I'm not saying this is like right or wrong for anyone listening, because I tend to be someone that has kind of explosive emotions and like really big ones and, big highs, big lows. But I do think that we're in the revenue challenge. Anytime there's a goal setting situation and people have really strong reactions to it, I'm always like watching and thinking, what is that? And one of the things I was thinking today is I think when you have really extreme reactions to creating goals, it's because like you don't have a great relationship with the process, with the journey. And I've just seen you over the last 5 rounds, apparently, really be methodical and calm and willing to work at it. Like when we coach on your webinars, there's just this willingness to get in there and do it without a lot of at least outward drama. And so I'm curious if you pick up on that. And if you do, like, what are your thoughts about the process? What are your thoughts about the journey that have really helped you kind of keep sanity and just keep going and work the process?
Yeah, I do think one of the thoughts that I wanted to share here is that I'm in this for the long run. I think that helps me a lot. Like it gives me this abundance of time versus this drive. And I think a lot of this has been honed in like my corporate life too, of being able to be calm, knowing that we are always like a budget target, another target, something's always coming up. Being able to look at it like neutral and decide how you want to feel about it and how you want to move forward with it. But also still having the emotions, right? And knowing that like those emotions are okay in the process. But I think what I've learned a lot too is just not using the goal against me, and I will get into some of, you teach the low value cycle. I will get into that. I just catch myself very quickly now.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
After years of coaching, of being like, okay, I'm there and I notice I'm having these negative thoughts about myself, but I can bring myself back a lot. Like, so there's more of, I guess, a buoyancy about it. Like I can jump back into it. There's just like a few things in my business where I felt really proud of myself. One is just like when I really went for the challenge, because you did it a few times. I don't know. I feel like in the first round, I was sort of like figuring out my way, figuring out if I belong. The biggest thing for me was just making the investment, because that made me feel like I'm serious about my business. I'm not just trying it on. I think I had a lot of pulls. I had a great corporate life and I could have become a like CFO for bigger businesses if I wanted that. But I knew for myself, I wanted to have this time with my kids. And the thing I always go back to though, when my thoughts go to like, oh, why don't you go back to corporate, is like, I don't want to be like putting my kid to bed and being like, you got to go to sleep. I have the board presentation to do, or my CEO's calling. I got to drop everything. Like, obviously I still have things that pull me.
Even the ability to walk out of your office, because this happens to me too. It's so hard when they're sick. Like, oh my God. And hand, foot, and mouth was like the worst ever. Like it was the most painful for him and the most painful for me. Cause they're in so much pain. Like it's so awful. And so it's awful when you're like, I have to work, but I'm hearing my baby crying and they're sick and, all of the things. But I try to think like, and also the fact that I even get to walk by, the fact that I get to figure out a 15 or 30 minute or hour window where I can go snuggle, or like the fact that I'm here, because in any other situation, I wouldn't be. I'd be gone all day. Like it's so big.
Yeah. And like for me, it's like, okay, when I'm done with work, we're going to snuggle all night. It's going to be me and you. I'm not worried about any like urgent fires at work, So I think that's big for me, of putting that bigger, broader perspective. I do really feel like, like right now I have 21 consults on the books and I have my podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Like I have things. So I'm not like in this, like, it's not going to happen or making it like all or nothing. I'm like, it's going to happen. And like, I think this is also the journey of motherhood, right? Like, sometimes they hit the milestones, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they like the things you sign them up for, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they won't eat. I don't know. There's just this like more embracing the unknown, but also
loose expectations. You have to have loose expectations.
but still having the progress and the standards, right? So
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
there's still those milestones. There's going to be tough times, but it's being with it versus trying to force something. I see it in my work too. It's like that masculine, feminine, right? You still want the task, but you want to be in a relationship and you don't want to like push yourself where you're like, in my mind, and I think this is more in my corporate world, right? I was like, I need to be here. I need to be here, versus now I'm like, I want to be here and I'm okay with here and I want to get here, but it's okay to be here too. So I think giving myself that space also helps me when I look and think about goals in that way, that this goal is for me. It's not, to be used against me or to punish myself or to be mean to myself.
And this business is for us, right? Like for me, like I think so many coaches, they love coaching and they love the idea of being a business owner and having their own coaching business. And then they get into the hard part of it and start experiencing failure and using their goals against themselves to say, make believe things pretty terrible about themselves or say terrible things to themselves. And then it becomes this thing that's no longer for them. And then they're resentful. And then it's like, oh, I have to do these things. And oh, my business is taking away. Like one of the things I had to really overcome after I had Jackson was that my business isn't taking away from my journey with him and my time with him, but my business is actually creating a lot of things that wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been there. And, people have been asking me like, oh, you're so fired up lately. I'm like, what is that? That was one of the major thoughts for me, is just getting out of my business is taking from me and finding all the ways it's giving to me. And even in the journey, like even in the, recreating a $10 million business that fits the life that I have now and the motherhood journey that I'm on, because I want to have another one. And just like seeing all of the ways that it's giving to me. I love the thought that you're building this business and you have 2 girls watching you. Like how crazy is it going to be that, in a few short years, they'll be old enough to really remember stuff. And they're going to remember that you had that webinar and they're going to remember that you did 3 calls and they're going to remember that you did a consult. They're going to ask you if the person signed, right? You're probably not doing consults by then, but like they're going to ask how many people you sold on the webinar. You're going to tell them about people buying through email. Then you're going to go to soccer practice and they're going to remember that. It's just the most incredible feeling to think about. Someone was it Jenna Kutcher? I don't know if you know who that is, but she does like the Gold Digger podcast. And I follow her on Instagram and she had this really awesome reel that said something about don't think about them. It was like her daughter in her office playing on the floor while she's working. And she's like, don't think about the time that you're giving up for your business. Think about you're teaching your child to fight for their dreams. Like you're showing them what it looks like to show up and work hard for something. And that like hit me so hard. Like just that's what we're modeling here. Like, yes, we're not able to be with them 100% of the time. And that is very difficult, but also we're modeling and showing them what it's like to work hard for something and to go after your dreams and to do it when it's inconvenient and to do it when it's hard and to do it when it does sometimes take things from you. And we're showing them emotional resilience if we talk about failure to them and we get back up. And I think about all the conversations I'm going to have with Jackson when he gets older and all the things he'll learn just from having a mom who's an entrepreneur.
Even my daughter now, she's 3 and she'll be like, how was your meeting?
Oh my gosh.
Ask me like questions about it. And
so sweet.
I think it's important, that they see that me and my husband, we work hard, but we play hard and that this is part of the life. And we also enjoy what we do for work. We're not like, resentful of it, right? There's of course polls because sometimes we want to be in 2 places at once.
Yeah.
And logistically it's a lot, but it's also showing them like what it is to really live a full life, still have the family and to still have the great relationships and to go after your dreams. Like I do think that's like super important.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so let's switch gears. I'm just curious, like if you think back to the journey, what are some of the beliefs that are like solid now about you and your business that maybe weren't there before?
The thought for me is I'm good at selling. I think that was really hard for me when I was in corporate, but then I also thought I'm selling a budget. I'm selling an investment. I'm selling, my CEO and I are trying to sell like ourselves to get more funding for things. So I think, bridging that, has been difficult for me in the beginning because I was like, am I good at selling? Like that entrepreneurship. And sales and finance in the corporate world always have friction, right? Like,
Yeah.
bring in the money, but I don't want to pay that much for it. And but also being really respectful of the sales engine. Like if
Yeah.
you can't sell, like that is the lifeblood of our organization. And so I think for me, it's like believing now that I can sell, that I am good at selling versus like, oh, I don't know about sales. I can do a lot of other things.
So good. That's so crazy that you said that because I am creating, next upcoming episodes of the podcast. And I was thinking about how I want to do one on the power of believing you could literally sell anything to anyone at any price point. Not that you're going to, but the belief that you can and what difference it makes for the impact that you're able to have when you have that thought. And I think that's kind of a version of that. It's like, I'm really good at selling.
And I think that it's so interesting because in the corporate world, people are doing all this market research to come up with like the perfect product a lot of times and not spending enough time just like in that thought work or in that like selling themselves on why it's great and teaching people why it's great, right? I oftentimes think about, even Steve Jobs, like I think if he described, the iPad or like the iPhone to people, they're like, I don't know. I don't really want that, right? No, everybody has it, right? They're like, why would I want this thing? But once you like, for you, when you love it, when you love the container and you learn how to sell it, that's really, bringing people on that journey. And I think starting my business and doing 2K for 2K, I just like sold that package until I got to, I think even like a year and a half of just selling that. And that was so incredible because I could have been spinning. I could have been like testing the waters, all the different products, all the different packages, right? And just doing all of the things, trying to make it easy to sell versus learning the skill of selling and like loving my offer and just doing it over and over again.
Okay, so we have to just like pause and make sure everyone heard that because you just dropped a huge nugget. The difference of making it easy to sell, like finding an offer that feels easy to sell versus learning how to sell. I didn't even say it exactly the way you said it. I felt like you said it perfectly. So everyone just needs to rewind, like hit the 10-second button a couple times. But that was perfect. That is really the difference. Like you can try to make it easier and bypass the journey of learning to sell and change your offer a million different ways to land on that perfect thing that suddenly no longer gets objections. Or you just learn how to sell any offer and you learn how to overcome the objections. You learn how to talk through those things. And it is a more confronting, uncomfortable process. And also once you break through, you have it for life.
Yeah. And I love that, like, you're dependent on yourself and you empower yourself. And of course, one of the things you teach is like turning it on and off versus being dependent on like the perfect recipe and talking to more people and being so externally focused that you're just kind of like spinning and running around, changing your offer all the time, thinking that it's going to be easier to sell.
Yeah. I do think that there's a lot of marketing people in the world that they do that, right? Like the whole marketing system, not to be like anti it, but I do think it was built on this idea that like just it's a numbers game, right? And even sales for a long time, for many, many years, it was built on it's a numbers game, right? Like you just need to expose your offer to as many people as possible. And really what I think that is there's 20% of the people that are always going to buy, 20% that will never buy, and 60% that could be not convinced, but like you could convince them, right? Like they could be sold. I think that the numbers game is just playing off of 20% always buy. But I've been also thinking a lot about, because I have an entrepreneur series course coming out, and that is all about attracting your best clients and really like thinking about how do you get really incredible clients? Well, it's not in the just 20% who always buy, because the people who always buy. So it's not necessarily a significant factor in them being your best person. And so I think there's a piece of that too. Like the people that are like your perfect people, some of them will be that 20%. But just because they have like a buyer's mentality, it just doesn't mean that they're your perfect person. There's a lot of perfect people in that 60% that could be sold. They just have like friction. They have resistance. They have stuff going on in their life. They have obstacles they have to overcome in order to, really get there. Like I think about me, like I was not the perfect buyer necessarily. When I hired my first coach or when I went to coach training, I didn't have the money easily. I had lots of objections. I had lots of difficulties. And I was also most improved player. Like every room I go in, I'm the most improved player. So I think that's so important to think about is just the skill of being able to have those conversations and be really good at selling. It opens you up to selling what you want. And it also opens up you having better clients.
As you're talking about that, I think this again is where masculine and feminine play in. It's like masculine to go after the numbers and to, of course, you need to get out there, right? And do it.
Yeah.
But the masculine can get you the 20%. The masculine with the feminine, the quality and like the care and the way you do it to attract those people. That's probably the difference between 20 and like 50 or 60 or like whatever. So it's like the same action, but it's doing it with that thinking, about your person and really focusing and knowing how to talk to them in a way that brings them on that journey versus, just doing more and more action. Right. And then for you too, as a leader, like I feel like the more I'm invested in my business, the more I feel full and like that it's meaningful versus, oh, I just need to tick these boxes to make some money.
Yeah, that's so good. So you've said this a couple of times, and I think everyone has kind of a different understanding or definition of it, but you've talked about the difference between masculine and feminine energy. What does it mean to you when you say feminine energy, especially when it comes to sales and offers, like in this context of the conversation? How would someone connect to that? Like if someone's like, I don't know what she means, how would you describe being in feminine energy with your offer and with selling?
Yeah. So when I think about feminine energy, I'm thinking about qualities like collaboration, quality, like my best client. I'm thinking about being in relationship and rapport with them. I'm thinking about nurturing them. And I love your like 3-year bicycle, right? Like you're really nurturing them for the long run. And feminine is creative, right? It's really creative and it could be very integrative too of thinking about the other person. But I also think as an entrepreneur, some people stay in that feminine energy too much and they start spinning in the offers or the scenarios or the kind of circular thinking, which is helpful in the creative process. But you need the masculine synergy of being like, have a goal, being focused as well.
Let's get this done.
Yeah, let's get this done. So I always talk about it's really the synergy of both that helps us. And that synergy often comes from the vision of like what you want to create is really feminine and the masculine is in service, the action, but it's the action with intention. So I know you've also been talking about the unintentional sales pitch too, right?
Yeah.
So that's like trying to do the masculine of ticking the box without the feminine of being in it for you, for the person. So it's really that integration. And that's how I, coach people too. It's like we have these energies and sometimes it's exhausting and we don't feel in relationship with ourselves if that's out of balance.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I also think the masculine does, though, help you in your business have boundaries and honor decisions and be in more control of your business, right? So I think the feminine is like, you're right, like all the creativity, the connection with your people, the relationship, the service energy, receiving energy. I've been thinking about that with the revenue challenge is like, there's going out and working hard for it, but there's also being willing to receive that. So that like is so important. So the coaching that I was giving this person was, she had a special that she was running and she had talked to a client and said, hey, if you want to renew, like I have this special, it's for this specific month only. And then the client had said, well, I'm feeling really foggy right now. Can we like have this conversation, on our next call, which is in early November? Like she was like, oh, yes, of course. But then afterwards she had this like bad feeling about it where like, oh, but I actually only wanted this special to be for this month. And this tends to be a client who spends a lot of time in feminine energy, which is so beautiful and calming and like you love it. And also you have to exercise the masculine if you want to have control over your business. So I was giving her the example of in masculine energy, and I didn't say it in this context, but I'll say it here. In masculine energy, the way I would deal with that is say, listen, you can have all of the time that you want. The special is for this month and it would be this much in November. However, we don't want you to make a decision from fogginess. So it's not worth the discount to make a decision from fogginess. So I get to, in the feminine, be in collaboration with the client, give them what they need, honor their, not wanting them to make a decision quickly and in fogginess. But I also, in the masculine, get to honor that the discount is only for this time. And I think that's so important because if we want to love what we do, we want to have amazing clients, we want to love our offer, we want to have a great relationship with our business, and we don't want to be overgiving and crossing our boundaries and serving others at the expense of ourselves and giving more than we want to or more than we intend. And so that's, I think, another good example of balancing those out. I love this conversation. Like we could have it all day.
No, and I mean, that's one of the things that I appreciate about your coaching. It is balanced in that way. It's like people first, but we also have to run a business, right? And sometimes people like those boundaries, like with your kids, right? They like boundaries. They need to have them. Otherwise, they feel out of control. And so sometimes even having that boundary for someone else gets them really clear with themselves because now you're like, well, no, this is the playground, right? And you're safe in this playground and you have other opportunities. But I think that masculine energy is very protective too, right? It's like providing protective for us and for them because it's like there's a line in the sand, right? We have to have that like firmness too to help people feel safe. Otherwise, they're like, this person's just giving me whatever offer off of their mind, right? And they're not really thinking about
Ooh, that's so interesting.
And yourself, right? Because sometimes when you ask an offer and you're kind of pushing the boundaries, but you're like, let's see, But I always like respect people when they're like, no, that's not my offer, and I'm like, okay, I tried, right? Like,
me too. That, right? That's so interesting.
It, right? You're just kind of like, okay, what is it? Because you don't know where that line is, but you can always ask and figure it out. Because I think even as being a CEO in my business, right? I like the fact that I get to check in with myself and say, do I want to give a discount? Is this something that I want to do and why? And having that relationship with myself where I can trust myself, with those balance of energies being like, okay, I'm willing to do it for these reasons and for me and for them, right? So,
well, and that's like the beauty is like when you have a really well-balanced masculine and feminine in business, the other thing is, so for me, I do have pretty firm boundaries with things. And because of that, I have so much control in my business, so much perceived control that I don't feel walked over all the time. So it's also easy for me to know when I want to make an exception. When I'm like, actually, listen, like, for example, when people, we closed the revenue challenge and we even extended it and people have still been asking, can I get in? And like, I've been like, just email my team, see if they'll say yes, right? They're for sure going to say yes. And I think that that's like really powerful to be like, oh, I exercise the boundaries enough that I know also when I'm willing to make an exception. I know when I'm willing to go outside of the box and it feels good to me and it feels in service of both me and the client. And I think it's hard to, unless you've exercised the masculine and feminine and created the balance and you have control and you're coming from the established place of I'm not always over serving and I get to be served too. And I know, I have these rules and they work for me. Then you get to go outside of it. And it's a little bit easier to go and pull yourself back. And so I think that's really helpful too, is it's not really about the situation where, it doesn't matter if she gives the offer to the person or not a week later. Like, I don't think that's the bigger picture. But what I know the client is really working on is being able to have that control instead of like feeling like the business just kind of happens. And it's like, I'm at the mercy of where it flows versus I create, the river, like I make the path. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, because I think what you're underlying is like the more you exercise that and understand that balance, the more you trust yourself and the more flexible and nimble you can be. Because it doesn't take you so long to like, think about something. You're like, okay, I trust myself to make these choices.
Yeah. So good. Okay, this is going to be another ambiguous one, but if you could tell yourself something specific to save you time on your journey, like looking back, if you could tell your past self something specific to save you time on your journey, what would it be?
I think for me, it's not selfish to outsource. I don't know. It's like one of the things that I think about. And I don't know. I think this is more from my personal life than in my entrepreneurial life. But I think it's been such a big impact, even like the first time of getting like a babysitter or like I have an au pair now. And I'm like, she makes my life easier. She makes our whole life easier. She enables me to do the things that I want to do. And I think having a big life and having big goals, personal and professional, I think that there's like a lot of judgment out there of like how you should do it. And I think I had it too before being a mother. I'm like, I don't know, like they have, a nanny all the time or like there's a lot of ways you can judge it. But I think giving myself permission. And I think I'm getting better and better at it, of just being able to outsource things or make those choices, even if other people don't agree, right? It's just more about how I agree with it. I think would save me kind of a lot of that back and forth thinking about, am I a good mother? Am I not? Right? Like that feminine piece. And like, actually, I went to your last live event and that was like a big, because my daughter was only like 2 months old.
I remember that.
Yeah. And I think for me, it wasn't like proving something to myself. It was more giving myself something.
Oh, yeah. That's so nice.
Like I'm giving this to myself. I'm making it work.
So glad you came, because that was the last one, at least for a while.
Yeah. And I think for me, I was like, I had to think about both of them. And it took me a bit of time, with those masculine and feminine things too. And I had that whole thing about like, I need to bring breast milk home. And even going through that, not having to be, a traveling corporate woman working person, but it helps me also see my clients, right? Some of them have these struggles. And it's like, how do you navigate that in a world that maybe is very masculine, but in your own way, and getting what you need for your family and asking for help? Like, I think it was a big thing for me to I think a lot of people on your staff knew about it. A lot of people were trying to figure it out in the hotel. And I did get a solution.
I think I remember this. Did we have to get permission for the Four Seasons? Had to store it for you or something?
Or not
the Four Seasons, whatever the hotel we were at, they had to store it for you. I remember them telling me and me being like, they better not lose that. Are they sure they're going to take good care of it? Like, I was like so anxious for you. I was like, they better not mess this up. Are you sure no one's going to throw that out?
But I think this is the feminine piece too. And I remember you seeing me and asking me like, is it like figure it out? And this is not the type of thing. I think for me, being a businesswoman, I'm like, if I was like at like some corporate conference, I would not have all these people coming up to me. I mean, firstly, there's a lot of women around, so they're just asking, but also I probably wouldn't feel as comfortable just being like, hey, I have this thing. Maybe with my leadership team, if I had a lot of relationship. But I think for me, that was growth too. It was like, I need this thing and I'm not going to be apologetic about it. I just it's done. But, a lot of spaces women are in, they're like, this is not something you talk about. It's something you deal with by yourself. And you
let's change that for sure.
Yeah. I think this is the whole world of my mission as a coach is like to change that, to have more human spaces for people
Yes. Okay. This is the final one. And then I also am going to ask you to share anything that you wanted to share that we haven't covered. But what do you think is the unexpected thing about the journey that people need to be prepared for? Like something that is like a normal part of the journey that maybe people would be caught by surprise or would think something's gone wrong or this isn't normal, but it actually is. Is there anything that comes up when I ask that?
I think that it is harder than it seems. Even like being in the room with a lot of the coaches, right? Like I think there's a way you can like have all these golden projections of people or an entrepreneur. Or I oftentimes think about, people thinking about me when they see, or like when they see things, they're like, oh, it just must be easy, or this is great. You're just out there in the world sharing your ideas. It's so funny. I feel like I'm quoting, Olivia as well with the gag and go. I'm like, I've had so much more gag and go in the last, like with the group and with the podcast and just like being in the space of like, this is living that transformation. This is not just teaching people about it. This is like being in it for myself. Your teaching is just really helping to like embrace that. You haven't failed. Like sometimes my brain goes like, this isn't working. I should feel much more in control. But I'm like,
or it shouldn't feel this hard.
Yeah. So
like feeling hard means that something's gone wrong.
Yeah. Like feeling so stressed is like something's gone wrong. But I'm like, no, I'm expanding. I'm doing really new things. And I have to remind myself that like, this is part of the growth. This is part of the expansion.
I do think
child motherhood, right?
Yeah. I do think when I think about the combination of being a coach and an entrepreneur, I do think is a very special thing, this combination. And I've been thinking that I do think it's like we are pushing our brains to the absolute like max of their abilities, capacities, capabilities. Like we are really asking the most of our brains. And I do think that it's hard, right? It's like we're taking the intangible and creating it to be tangible. We're helping people create real world change. And it's the hardest thing. And we're real world changing ourselves. We're rewiring our brains. We're actually creating new neural pathways. We're creating new belief systems. This is the hardest thing to do. It's normal that it is hard. And so I think that that is such a good one to get to tell people, is that it's harder than it seems. And that's okay. Nothing's gone wrong with it. Like, we're just doing big things and we're asking big things of our brains.
Yeah. It helps me to see things in a broader perspective.
Yeah.
And to know that I think this is one of the biggest things about being in your community. It's like doing it with other people and knowing that everybody's at the same place in that journey. Totally fine. It's totally normal. Versus if I was like a lone entrepreneur, I'd be like, are people struggling like me? Because you only see what's on the outside, right? That finished product that like looks so clean and polished.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, especially with social media now, right? We only see the highlight reel. We don't see like the behind the scenes.
Like when you see like the family portraits and you're like, oh, it's so beautiful. And you're like, oh yeah, before that we were yelling at each other and we had headaches and like there was a big it's like, you don't.
My favorite family portraits are the ones where like somebody has a crazy face, or like we just got one at Disney with Jackson's meeting Goofy. Neil's holding him and his whole body is like limp and freaking out and his face is like, ah! Like he looks in so much distress and Neil's smiling and it's the best. And there's one from Italy where like we're trying to take a photo in front of a fountain in Lake Como and Jackson is like not having it. And my nanny had like snapped the photo right at the moment I decided, fuck this, we're done. And like my face literally looks like, just forget it. And it's like I'm mid getting up with just forget it face. And Jackson's like going crazy. And I'm like, those are my favorite though. Cause I'm like, that's reality. Like that's the real moment that you're going to look back and be like, oh, I remember that. Like, it's like the perfectly posed smiling ones. You have a million of them, right? And they all look the same. We're all so happy. But like the real ones, that's when you're like, oh, I remember that moment. And then there's a story behind it.
Well, I think that's also like, so now when I do webinars, I have, lots of people who come and I have people who convert, but I still remember when I started doing it. And I remember there was like 2 people on it. I remember like when I clicked the record button, one freaked out and left. And then there was just one. And I just remember being like, I'm going to serve this person. And she actually became a client. But I was also like in that mindset, kind of how you talked to us about launching, like this is for your next one. And I just remember I'm going to serve the crap out of this person. And just on my journey of webinars, I'm like, yeah, listen, I remember those days. And I'm like proud of myself for showing up for me, for the client, and not just like, okay, forget it, like did all this stuff and only one person showed up. But
so good.
I think the thought also that helps me is like, you have to start somewhere.
So good. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing all of your thoughts. Like, I loved this conversation. So good I just know everyone in the revenue challenge and everyone, like just everyone in general listening is going to get so much from this. So I really love that.
All right, there you have it. I had so much fun in the interview with Stacey, exploring the importance of balancing masculine and feminine energy in my business and my life in general. But what impact could the same work have on you, on the way you lead? By understanding and harnessing both aspects of ourselves, we can unlock our full potential, getting things done while leading with confidence, compassion, and authenticity. I want you to go out and try it on. I want to hear how embracing more feminine values like quality, trust, rapport, connection, even more messiness in your life is impacting how you show up for yourself, for others, for your company, for your communities. So feel free to drop a review about this episode or DM me directly. I would love to hear how embracing these feminine values and unlocking the synergies between masculine and feminine energies impacts you. All right, have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week. If you enjoyed today's episode and don't want to worry about missing another one in the future, you can follow the show. And if you haven't done so already, I would really appreciate it if you could share the podcast with others who you think could benefit from it. And leave a rating and review to let me know what you think. I'm creating this show just for you, so I want to know what you want to hear about in the coming episodes. Visit www.aspire-coaching.co/podcast launch for step-by-step instructions on how to follow, rate, and review. Thank you for tuning in, and take care until next time.
Thank you for being a part of the Balanced Leader community. We hope you found today's episode inspiring and actionable. For more resources and to connect with Jan, visit us at aspire-coaching.co. Until next time, keep leading with confidence and purpose.